She was just another civilian pilot, flying businesspeople across the country. Nobody suspected her secret past. But when an emergency struck and F-22 Raptors scrambled, military pilots heard a familiar call sign over the radio. Eagle 1. Their shock was instant. The legend they thought had vanished was flying right above them. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning sun shone brightly across the runway at Denver International Airport. Rachel Morgan walked around the small business jet, checking everything carefully. She was 35 years old and worked as a corporate pilot. Her uniform looked plain and simple. Nothing about her suggested she was anything special. Rachel worked for Executive Air Services. Her job was to fly rich businesspeople across the country. It was steady work. Comfortable work. Most importantly, nobody asked questions about her past. Inside the terminal, 3 business executives waited for their flight to Seattle. They barely looked at the woman who would fly them across 4 states. To them, she was just another pilot. Someone who had probably learned to fly at a normal flight school and worked her way up over the years. Her co-pilot, Jason Webb, greeted her with a smile. Jason was 28 years old and had been flying corporate jets for 3 years. He liked working with Rachel because she was calm and professional. Once, he had asked her where she learned to fly. Rachel gave him a simple answer about flight school in California. Jason believed her and never asked again. The passengers got on the plane and sat in the comfortable leather seats. Rachel prepared the cockpit, running through all her checklists carefully. The engine started smoothly. Her voice came through the cabin speakers with the usual announcements. She drove the jet to the runway, got permission from the tower, and pushed the throttles forward. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the Colorado sky. The takeoff was perfect. So smooth that the passengers didn't even notice. Rachel leveled off at 37,000 feet and turned on the autopilot. The morning flight was going exactly as planned. Clear skies stretched across the Rocky Mountains. The weather reports showed perfect conditions all the way to Seattle. She watched her instruments with practiced ease, making small adjustments and talking to air traffic control in calm, measured tones. Jason was reviewing the approach procedures for Seattle. The passengers worked on their laptops in the cabin. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly how Rachel wanted it. She had built this quiet civilian life carefully over the past 6 years. She intended to keep it that way. But the peaceful morning was about to change in a way Rachel never imagined. Rachel's radio suddenly crackled with an urgent message from Denver Center. The air traffic controller's voice sounded tense. He was sending an emergency broadcast to all aircraft in the region. An unidentified aircraft had entered restricted military airspace without permission. The aircraft was not responding to radio calls. Its flight pattern suggested either hostile intent or serious problems. Rachel's mind automatically processed the information. Her eyes scanned the sky while her hands stayed steady on the controls. The controller's next messages painted an increasingly serious picture. The unidentified aircraft was a small twin-engine plane. It had departed from an unknown location and was flying erratically toward populated areas. Rachel could hear the tension building in the controller's voice. Military fighters were being scrambled to intercept. She found herself automatically calculating intercept angles and defensive positions. But she kept her expression neutral and maintained her aircraft's course. Then came the transmission that would change everything. A new voice appeared on the emergency frequency. It had the sharp, authoritative tone that Rachel recognized instantly. Military Fighter Communications. The voice identified itself as Raptor 121, an F-22 Raptor from the Colorado Air National Guard. The fighter was now supersonic and closing on the unidentified aircraft with orders to establish visual identification. Rachel felt her chest tighten at the mention of the F-22. Memories flooded back. The aircraft she had once known more intimately than any civilian plane. The fifth-generation fighter that represented the absolute peak of aerial combat capability, the platform where she had spent the most intense years of her life. Raptor 1-1 reported visual contact with the unidentified aircraft. He described it as a Beechcraft Baron with visible damage to its tail. The plane was flying in a dangerously unstable manner. The F-22 pilot's voice remained professional but tense as he moved his fighter into position. He was trying to establish visual signals with the pilot since radio communications had failed. Rachel listened with forced calm. But her mind was running tactical calculations that came from a completely different world. She analyzed the F-22 pilot's approach and considered the limited options for dealing with an uncontrolled aircraft near a major city. The situation got worse rapidly. Raptor 1-1 reported that the Baron appeared to have an unconscious pilot. The cockpit was visible through his sensors, but the pilot inside seemed unresponsive. Meanwhile, the aircraft continued its erratic path. It would come dangerously close to downtown Denver within minutes. Denver Center was coordinating emergency responses. They were trying to clear airspace and alert ground emergency services. But an uncontrolled aircraft was an impossible problem with no good solutions. Then came the moment that would expose everything Rachel had worked so hard to hide. Military Command sent a routine query to Denver Center. They requested confirmation of all aircraft currently operating near the emergency zone. The controller responded with a list of aircraft positions and identifications. When he reached the Cessna citation at 37,000 feet, he provided Rachel's aircraft registration number and the pilot's name from the filed flight plan. There was a pause in the military communications. Then a different voice came on the frequency. It belonged to Raptor 1-2, the second F-22 that had been scrambled as backup. The voice carried unmistakable shock. Denver Center, Raptor 1-2 requesting confirmation on that last aircraft identification. Did you say Captain Rachel Morgan is flying that citation? The controller confirmed the information with slight confusion in his voice. Another pause. Then Raptor 1-2's voice came back, now filled with disbelief and something approaching awe. Center, be advised, if that's the Rachel Morgan I think it is, you have Eagle 1 in your airspace. Repeat, Eagle 1 is flying civilian corporate at Angels 37. Rachel's hands tightened on the citation's controls. Her expression remained neutral behind her sunglasses. But inside, she felt her carefully constructed civilian life cracking apart. Eagle 1 had been her call sign in another world. A legend among F-22 pilots who spoke of her missions with reverence. She had walked away from that world 6 years ago for reasons that still haunted her. She had chosen the anonymous peace of civilian aviation over the relentless intensity of elite fighter operations. Jason stared at her with complete confusion. Eagle 1. What are they talking about? Raptor 1-1's voice joined his wingman, the tactical situation momentarily forgotten. Eagle 1. The Eagle 1, Rachel Morgan who flew the Crimson Tide missions. Rachel could hear the barely controlled excitement in these younger fighter pilots' voices. They were processing the impossible information that someone they had only known as an almost mythical figure was apparently flying a corporate jet in their airspace. Her passengers had stopped working. They were staring forward toward the cockpit, trying to understand what was happening. Rachel knew she could no longer remain silent. Not when lives were at stake and her presence had been revealed in a way that was disrupting the military response to a genuine crisis. She keyed her microphone with decisive authority. Her voice took on a different quality. The tone of someone who had commanded fighter pilots through situations where hesitation meant death. Raptor Flight, Eagle 1 Actual. Stand down the hero worship and focus on your mission. You have an uncontrolled aircraft heading toward populated areas and you're wasting time discussing ancient history. The transformation was immediate and unmistakable. The civilian pilot's pleasant professionalism was replaced by the clipped authority of a combat aviator who expected instant obedience. Raptor 1-1's response came back with renewed focus but also clear respect. Eagle 1, Raptor 1-1. Copy that, ma'am. Situation is critical. Baron pilot appears incapacitated. Aircraft is on a failing autopilot system. Current trajectory puts it over downtown Denver in 7 minutes. We have authorization for defensive action if necessary, but command is requesting alternatives. Rachel's mind shifted fully into tactical mode. Years of civilian flying fell away. She accessed the training and experience that had made her legendary. She analyzed the situation with the comprehensive awareness that came from countless hours commanding the world's most advanced fighter. She questioned Raptor flight for detailed information. The Baron's exact flight characteristics. Engine status, damage assessment. Her questions revealed an understanding that went far beyond civilian pilot training. Within seconds, Rachel had formulated a plan that made the F-22 pilots pause when she outlined it. She proposed a coordinated maneuver. The Raptors would use their thrust vectoring capabilities and flight control systems to generate precisely calculated pressure waves. These waves could influence the Baron's flight path. The technique would essentially use the stealth fighter's aerodynamic signature to push the uncontrolled aircraft away from Denver and toward unpopulated terrain. The maneuver was theoretical. Discussed in advanced fighter tactics courses but never actually attempted. It required extraordinary precision and intimate knowledge of both aircraft's aerodynamic characteristics. Raptor 1's response carried both skepticism and hope. Eagle 1, that maneuver is extremely dangerous and has never been field tested. Our tactical computers are showing less than 40% success probability. Rachel's response was immediate and carried the weight of experience these younger pilots couldn't match. Raptor, I've used similar techniques in classified operations you don't have clearance to know about. It works if you have the skill and the discipline. I'm talking you through it step by step. You follow my instructions exactly. No improvisation. No hesitation. Understood? The F-22 pilot's demeanor transformed completely. Their earlier shock was replaced by focused intensity. They found themselves being commanded by someone whose tactical expertise was even more formidable than her legendary reputation suggested. Rachel's voice took on the rhythm of combat operations as she walked the Raptor pilots through the setup. She directed their positioning relative to the Baron with specific altitude, speed, and distance parameters. Her instructions revealed her comprehensive understanding of the F-22's flight characteristics. She directed Raptor 1-1 into position ahead and slightly above the Baron. She talked him through the precise power settings and control inputs needed to generate the specific wake pattern. This would create downward pressure on the smaller aircraft without causing structural damage. Simultaneously, she directed Raptor 1-2 to position on the Baron's opposite quarter. This created a coordinated pressure envelope that would guide the aircraft's trajectory away from the city. The execution required split-second timing and absolute trust in Rachel's calculations. As she counted down the initiation sequence, her voice carried the same calm authority that had once guided combat missions through contested airspace. Raptor 1, on my mark, reduce power to 78% and execute a 3-degree nose-up attitude change with a 1.5-second hold. Raptor 2, you'll mirror the maneuver 5 seconds later on the opposite side. The pressure differential will alter the Baron's heading approximately 8 degrees if I've calculated correctly. The F-22 pilots acknowledged with tight voices. Then Rachel gave the mark with the decisiveness of someone who had made life-and-death calls countless times before. Raptor 1-1 executed the maneuver with precision. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then sensors showed the Baron's nose shifting. Not dramatically, but enough to alter its trajectory exactly as Rachel had predicted. The invisible pressure wave from the F-22's wake acted like a giant hand, pushing the smaller aircraft into a different flight path. Raptor 1-2 executed his part of the sequence 5 seconds later. The combined effect steered the Baron away from its collision course with Denver, sending it instead toward empty grassland terrain where an uncontrolled landing would harm nobody. But Rachel wasn't finished. Her tactical mind was already several steps ahead. She directed the Raptors through additional pressure manipulations that further refined the Baron's trajectory toward the most favorable crash site. At the same time, she was reducing its airspeed. She was essentially flying the uncontrolled aircraft remotely, using the F-22s as her control surfaces. The display of aerodynamic mastery and tactical aviation left everyone monitoring the frequency in awe. The Baron touched down roughly but survivably in the grassland. Emergency response teams reached it quickly enough to extract the pilot, who had suffered a stroke but was alive. The outcome was as successful as anyone could have hoped for. It was achieved through a tactical aviation technique that would immediately be classified and studied. Raptor 1's voice came through with barely controlled emotion. Eagle 1, that was the most incredible piece of flying I've ever seen, and you weren't even in the aircraft. How did you know that would work? Rachel's response carried a hint of the weight she had carried for years. Because I've done similar in worse conditions when failure wasn't an option. You did good work, Raptor Flight. Jason was staring at Rachel with his mouth open. The passengers in the cabin were completely silent, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Denver Center's controller addressed Rachel directly, his voice carrying confusion. Citation November 7:35 Bravo, was that really you coordinating that operation? Are you former military? Rachel considered her response carefully. She knew that the exposure she had dreaded for 6 years was now complete. Denver Center, affirmative. I have prior military experience. Requesting clearance to continue to Seattle is filed. But Raptor 1-1 cut through with unmistakable pride. All stations, Raptor 1-1. Captain Rachel Morgan is former United States Air Force, call sign Eagle 1. She was one of the first operational F-22 Raptor pilots and flew classified air superiority missions that shaped how the Raptor is employed today. She's credited with multiple air-to-air victories and tactical innovations that are still classified. Finding out she's been flying corporate jets is like discovering a championship Formula One driver has been driving a taxi. The radio exploded with responses as the revelation rippled through the aviation community. Commercial airline pilots expressed disbelief. Military pilots struggled to understand why a legendary combat aviator had walked away. Controllers pieced together the impossible truth. Rachel maintained her composure. She acknowledged clearance to continue to Seattle and returned her attention to flying the Citation as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Though she could feel the weight of 6 years of carefully maintained secrecy collapsing around her. Jason finally found his voice. You flew F-22s. You were a fighter pilot. Why didn't you ever tell me? Rachel kept her eyes on the instruments. Because I left that world, Jason. And the only way to actually leave was to become someone different. The descent into Seattle was textbook perfect. Her landing was precise in ways that suddenly made complete sense given her background. The passengers exited quickly. Their earlier casual confidence was replaced by uncomfortable awareness. Rachel's phone began buzzing constantly during the turnaround. Messages flooded in from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Former squadron members, military public affairs officers, aviation reporters who sensed a major story. Rachel ignored them all. She focused on preparing for the return flight to Denver. When she landed back in Denver that evening, 2 black SUVs with military plates were waiting on the tarmac. A colonel emerged from the first vehicle in full dress uniform. His expression carried both professional concern and personal respect. Captain Morgan, or should I say Major Morgan, we need to talk. Rachel stood her ground. Sir, with respect, my service ended 6 years ago by mutual agreement. What happened this morning was an emergency response to save civilian lives, not a demonstration that I'm ready to return to military operations. The colonel nodded. I understand, Major. But you should know that what you accomplished this morning created what they're calling a tactical breakthrough. The F-22 community wants you back. They're prepared to offer you a position at the weapons school as chief instructor for advanced tactics. Rachel felt the old pull. The temptation of returning to the world where she had excelled. But she also remembered why she had left. "Sir, I'm honored. But my answer is no. I left because I was becoming someone defined entirely by classified missions and a call sign that made normal life impossible." A lieutenant colonel stepped forward. "Major Morgan, I'm Colonel Sarah Brennan, 140th Wing Commander. Those are my pilots you just saved from a mission kill situation. What if you worked with us as a civilian contractor? Come in periodically to conduct advanced instruction without rejoining the military. You could maintain your civilian career." Before Rachel could respond, her phone rang with a call from Executive Air Services. The conversation was brief and professional, but the message was clear. They were placing her on administrative leave while they consulted legal counsel about the complications her background created. Rachel ended the call and looked at Colonel Brennan. "It seems my civilian career just ended." Brennan's expression softened. "You're in an impossible position now. You can't go back to anonymous flying. Take the contractor position, at least temporarily, while you figure out what comes next." Rachel found herself nodding slowly. "Colonel, I'll accept your contractor offer on a trial basis. One advanced tactics course, then we reassess." The following weeks brought the full reality of Rachel's exposure. Her story spread through aviation and military communities, generating media attention she had spent 6 years avoiding. She declined all media requests and focused on preparing the advanced tactics course. The course brought Rachel back into military instruction with intensity she had both missed and feared. She worked with carefully selected F-22 pilots, teaching them principles that went beyond standard tactics. She shared insights about the Raptor's capabilities that came from pushing the aircraft to its absolute limits. The pilots absorbed her instruction with hunger. Rachel felt satisfaction she hadn't experienced in civilian flying. This work genuinely mattered. She was shaping the future of air superiority operations. Colonel Brennan observed Rachel's conflicted state and approached her after a particularly intense training session. "Major, I can see you're struggling. Are you running from military aviation because you don't want to do it, or because you think you're not supposed to want it after choosing to leave?" The question forced Rachel to confront motivations she hadn't fully examined. Brennan continued, "Maybe you're creating a false choice. Deciding you have to be entirely Eagle One or entirely the corporate pilot, when maybe the truth is you're both. The contractor work gives you space to contribute without being owned by military service." Rachel considered the words, recognizing truth in them. Maybe accepting that Eagle One existed in how she analyzed situations, regardless of what uniform she wore, represented a path forward. The advanced tactics course concluded with recognition that Rachel had fundamentally transformed how the participating pilots understood their aircraft. Brennan offered an ongoing contractor position with clearly defined parameters. Quarterly instruction periods that would allow Rachel to maintain civilian flying while contributing to military aviation education. Rachel accepted with more peace than she had felt since that morning over Colorado. She also accepted a position with a small cargo operation based in Alaska, flying supplies to remote communities in demanding conditions. The work was unglamorous but satisfying. Her background was known, but it mattered less in places where people judged you by whether you showed up when weather kept other pilots grounded. The balance wasn't perfect. The visibility she had never wanted remained permanent. But Rachel gradually made peace with the reality that Eagle One and Rachel Morgan were both authentic parts of who she was. She flew F-22 simulators quarterly and conducted guest instructor flights, sharing expertise that shaped the next generation of fighter pilots. And she flew cargo through Alaskan winters that tested skills in ways combat had prepared her for. Years passed and Rachel's story became part of fighter pilot culture. The legend of Eagle One, who left military service at her peak. Whose extraordinary capabilities were revealed during an emergency that required exactly the skills she possessed. Young F-22 pilots entering the program heard her name during their initial tactical briefings. They studied maneuvers she had pioneered during classified operations. They watched carefully edited footage of her instructional sessions where she demonstrated principles that pushed the Raptor beyond what most aviators believed possible. In ready rooms of F-22 squadrons across the United States and allied nations, Eagle One's call sign achieved almost mythical status. But what made Rachel's legend particularly powerful was the human dimension her exposure had revealed. The fact that someone capable of operating at the absolute pinnacle of military aviation had chosen to walk away, and had found the courage to build a different life, even when it meant concealing extraordinary capabilities behind the exterior of civilian operations. The quarterly instruction periods Rachel conducted at various Air Force bases became highly sought-after assignments. She would arrive quietly, often flying herself in whatever cargo plane she happened to be operating. She would spend intense weeks working with small groups of elite aviators. Her instruction went beyond technical maneuvers and tactical procedures. She taught the psychological and cognitive aspects of operating at the edge of human capability, where split-second decisions determined whether missions succeeded or failed. Rachel discovered that teaching these younger pilots provided satisfaction different from, but equally meaningful as, her own operational flying. She was shaping the future of tactical aviation in ways that would ripple through decades of operations. The work required her to remain current with F-22 developments and continuously expand her understanding of the aircraft's evolving capabilities. Regular simulator sessions and occasional flights in the Raptor reminded her viscerally of why she had loved that aircraft, despite the costs it had demanded. But equally important to Rachel's sense of wholeness was the cargo flying that occupied most of her time. Flying a loaded Cessna Caravan through mountain passes in winter storms, navigating by visual reference when GPS signals became unreliable, landing on gravel strips that required judgment and skill rather than automation. This flying connected her to fundamental aviation principles in ways that even F-22 operations didn't capture. The people in remote Alaskan villages knew her as Rachel, the cargo pilot who could be counted on when weather grounded everyone else. They treated her with straightforward appreciation, valuing competence without being overwhelmed by reputation. 3 years after her exposure, Rachel was flying supplies to a village in the Brooks Range during marginal weather when she encountered another emergency. A medevac helicopter carrying a critically injured hunter had been forced to land on a frozen lake due to severe icing. It was 30 miles from the nearest medical facility. Rachel heard the distress call and immediately calculated that her caravan could reach the stranded helicopter and extract the patient if she was willing to attempt a landing on the frozen lake in conditions that violated safety protocols. The decision required exactly the kind of risk assessment that had characterized her most challenging F-22 missions. Weighing probability of success against consequences of failure while accepting that some situations demanded action despite uncertain odds. She diverted to the coordinates, descended through deteriorating visibility, and executed an approach to the frozen lake that drew on every bit of her tactical flying experience. The landing was rough but successful. Rachel coordinated with the helicopter crew to transfer the injured hunter into her aircraft, making rapid weight and balance calculations while preparing for a takeoff that would push her heavily loaded caravan to its limits. The departure required every foot of available ice surface and a climb angle that left almost no margin for error. But she flew the aircraft with precision that came from years of operating at the edge of capability. She delivered the patient to Fairbanks, where advanced medical care saved his life. The incident received regional news coverage that briefly reminded people of Rachel's military background. But what struck her as significant was how naturally she had drawn on capabilities from both worlds. The tactical decision-making from her F-22 experience combined with practical bush flying skills she had developed during cargo operations. She hadn't been thinking of herself as Eagle One or civilian pilot Rachel Morgan. She had simply been an aviator with specific capabilities, responding to a situation where those capabilities made a difference. The integration she had been working toward for years was becoming unconscious and natural rather than something she had to consciously navigate. Jason, who had remained her friend despite the initial shock, commented during one of their occasional phone conversations that Rachel seemed more at peace with herself. "You know, I used to think something was off when we flew together," he said. "Not bad. Just like you were holding something back. But now I think maybe you were trying to figure out who you were when you weren't being defined by what you could do in a fighter jet. Seems like you figured it out. His observation was accurate. Rachel appreciated that someone who had known her during the years when she was struggling could see the evolution that had occurred. She had stopped viewing Eagle One and Rachel Morgan as competing identities requiring her to choose between them. She recognized they were both authentic expressions of who she was in different contexts. The quarterly F-22 instruction wasn't a compromise. It was meaningful work she chose because it mattered and because she was uniquely qualified to do it. The cargo flying wasn't an escape from her capabilities. It was equally meaningful work that connected her to different communities and allowed her to employ her skills in ways that served immediate human needs. The media attention that had initially felt overwhelming gradually subsided as her story became part of aviation history rather than breaking news. She remained a figure of interest to aviation enthusiasts and military historians, but she had learned to set boundaries that protected her privacy. She gave occasional interviews to responsible journalists and participated in select aviation conferences where her presence could contribute to serious discussions about pilot training and tactical innovation. But she maintained space to live without constant scrutiny. Colonel Brennan, who had become something approaching a friend, once asked Rachel whether she had any regrets about how things unfolded after the F-22s revealed her identity. "Do you ever wish you had stayed completely hidden?" Rachel thought carefully before responding. "There are days when I miss the simplicity of being anonymous. But honestly, I think I was hiding from myself as much as from others during those corporate pilot years. The exposure forced me to stop pretending that Eagle One wasn't part of who I am. That integration, even though it was painful, ultimately made me more whole." Now, sitting in the cockpit of her Cessna Caravan on a clear autumn morning, preparing to depart from a small village after delivering supplies, Rachel felt contentment that had eluded her during the years when she was trying to be only one version of herself. The villagers waved as she started the engine, their friendliness uncomplicated by knowledge of her military background. She would fly this cargo route for another week, then head south to conduct an F-22 tactics course at Nellis Air Force Base. Moving between these different worlds with fluidity that no longer felt like contradiction, but rather like natural expression of someone who contained multitudes. The morning the F-22s had revealed her identity had felt like the destruction of everything she had carefully constructed during 6 years of civilian life. But time had shown her that what seemed like destruction had actually been revelation in the truest sense. Not just revealing her identity to others, but revealing to herself that she didn't have to choose between different parts of who she was. She could be the legendary fighter pilot whose innovations shaped modern tactical aviation. She could be the bush pilot who delivered supplies to remote villages. She could be the instructor who helped younger aviators understand what excellence demanded. She could be all of these things because they were all authentic expressions of capabilities and values that defined her. As Rachel advanced the throttle and felt the caravan accelerate down the gravel strip, lifting smoothly into the crystalline Arctic air, she smiled with genuine peace. Eagle One would always be part of her story. But so would Rachel Morgan, the cargo pilot. And so would all the other versions of herself that she continued to discover and develop. The F-22s had revealed who she really was. But what they revealed turned out to be more complex, more human, and ultimately more complete than the simple legend of a combat pilot who had walked away. They revealed a woman who had the courage to excel at the highest levels. The wisdom to recognize when excellence came at unsustainable cost. And the strength to build a life that honored all of who she was, rather than sacrificing parts of herself to maintain a simpler but less authentic narrative. And in the end, that was the most legendary thing about her after all. 5 years later, Rachel sat in a briefing room at Nellis Air Force Base. Around her sat 12 of the Air Force's best young F-22 pilots. They had been selected for her advanced tactics course, and they looked at her with a mixture of respect and nervous anticipation. "Before we begin," Rachel said, looking at each pilot in turn, "I want you to understand something important. Being legendary doesn't mean being perfect. It means being honest about who you are and what you can do." She pulled up a slide showing the emergency over Denver from years ago. That day, I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just a pilot with specific skills responding to a situation. The same way you will respond when your moment comes. And it will come. The question is, will you be ready? Not because you're trying to build a legend, but because you've trained so hard that excellence becomes automatic. The pilots nodded, hanging on every word. Eagle One isn't just a call sign, Rachel continued. It's a reminder that we're all more than one thing. I'm a fighter pilot. I'm a cargo pilot. I'm an instructor. I'm all of these things, and so are you. Don't limit yourself by thinking you have to choose just one identity. After the briefing, a young female pilot approached her hesitantly. Ma'am, I just want to say thank you. Knowing that someone like you exists makes this career feel possible for people like me. Rachel smiled, remembering her own early days in the F-22 program. You don't need me to make it possible. You just need to show up every day and do the work. The rest takes care of itself. As the pilot walked away, Rachel felt a deep sense of purpose. This was why the exposure had been worth it. Not for fame or recognition, but for the chance to inspire the next generation. To show them that strength comes in many forms, and that the bravest thing you can do is be completely, authentically yourself. Outside, an F-22 roared overhead, climbing into the Nevada sky. Rachel watched it go, feeling the familiar pull of the aircraft she would always love. But she also thought about the Cessna Caravan waiting for her in Alaska, and the villages that depended on her. Both worlds, both versions of herself, both equally real, equally important, equally her. Eagle One had finally learned to fly free. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more amazing true stories. Comment below which country you're watching from.